lot of these prison hospices would not even exist. You need people behind the walls who are determined to get a prison hospice like this. It was not easy. And a lot of times when I screen the film, I tell students, nursing students and stuff, they see people sitting next to Jack's bed and they think, oh, well, that's hospice, family's there. Sure. Jack's friend is there. Well, that's hospice. I go, you know what? No, it's hospice in a maximum security prison, which is a miracle.
Welcome to the Heart of Hospice podcast. I'm Helen Bauer. My guest today is documentary filmmaker Edgar Barens, whose work with the Humane Prison Hospice Project highlights prison hospice philosophy and the need for end-of-life programs in the U.S. prison system. Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, the Heart of Hospice podcast is here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care. The Heart of Hospice podcast is excited to announce our partnership with the Whole Care Network. The Whole Care Network is working to improve care and aging everywhere through education, resources, and storytelling. Check out the Whole Care Network for podcasts on caregiving, aging, and self-care. You can still find us at theheartofhospice.com and be sure to look for us on the Whole Care Network at thewholecarenetwork.com. I could have made a series that would last 4 or 5 episodes with Edgar Barens. He's an amazing guy, amazing work. My guest today, Edgar Barens, has a bachelor's degree and a master's of fine arts in cinema and photography from Southern Illinois University. He is a filmmaker who has produced documentary films, experimental shorts, music videos, and even public service announcements. His work has been screened at numerous film festivals, conferences. They've been broadcasted nationally and internationally and have also been distributed as educational tools. Edgar directs and produces documentary films that explore the many issues that are at play in the American criminal justice system. I think you're going to be very moved by what Edgar has to share, the work that he's done in the U.S. prisons to document the need for hospice care at end of life for prisoners. He's an interesting guy. His work is incredibly valuable and very intense. So without further ado, here's my discussion with Edgar Barens. Edgar, welcome to the Heart of Hospice podcast. I'm so thrilled about this interview and looking forward to our conversation.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to our conversation as well.
It's going to be awesome. So let's start with something a little casual before we get our feet wet in the deep water. What are you binge watching these days or binge reading these days?
Oh my God. Binge watching? I am actually watching, and it's very difficult. It's I think it's from Denmark or Germany. It's called Dark. It's a very long, convoluted, and I tell you, it is very challenging to the point we have abandoned it 3 or 4 times and gone back to it because we're we got to be smarter than this. We have to understand. It's like doing homework. So we did finish it. So I binge watched that. And binge reading, I've actually been doing a lot of research for a film project I'm going to be doing. So I've been kind of doing a lot of research on the Vietnam War and gay soldiers and a whole bunch of stuff. So, yeah, so that's what I've been doing recently.
Interesting. My binge watching, binge reading is not quite that lofty.
Well, listen, we go to the Carol Burnett show a lot, so don't.
Well, you need that when you're immersed in something heavy. You have to come up for air a few times and take a deep breath so that you can get back into the work.
Right, exactly.
We're going to start talking about your work. You made a film about the hospice program in Angola prison called Angola Prison Hospice: Opening the Door. It was a huge film, widely known. It's been several years. But how did you even get interested in the work that was being done in Angola for their inmates who were dying?
That's a great question. I mean, it actually goes back years to when I went to film school back in Carbondale, Illinois, Southern Illinois University, where I was taught, it was film school. It was like one of the top 7 maybe back in the day. And I, being from a kind of a politically active family, I was always attracted to film work. And I thought, well, if I want to like change the world or do something, maybe I could be a documentary filmmaker. So I went to school at SIU and I was down there for like 7 years. I got my bachelor's and my master's degree in film production. Eventually, I moved to New York City after graduate school. I got, I was a temp worker because I was also working in film. So but I needed to make ends meet. So I had to do some temp jobs. And one of my temp jobs, believe it or not, was working for the Open Society Institute. It's a foundation that George Soros, the Hungarian billionaire, started. The Open Society Institute dedicates itself to changing or fixing issues that are in the American landscape. So, a lot of the programs he had, the U.S. programs. One was on criminal justice. One was on medical, our medical system. One was on our legal system. One was on death and dying. So I lucked out, and I started working for the Center on Crime, Communities and Culture. And long story short, my boss there knew that I was a filmmaker, and a few years into my temp position there, I was asked to make a documentary about a program down in a prison in Louisiana. And that short film was going to be used for a conference, one of the first conferences ever, on death and dying in prisons and jails. In fact, we had Sister Helen Prejean open up the conference. So I said, yeah, sign me up. I'll do the film. They said, well, it's going to be down in Angola, Louisiana. I never heard of it. I mean, I really have not. I mean, I'll admit it. I never heard of Angola. So I was sent down there and was told to make a film about a program that they have there on prison hospice, taking care of their terminally ill prisoners. And to tell you the truth, that was the first time I ever heard or ever thought about prisoners dying in prison. And so I went down there, and for 3 weeks, a friend of mine who was shooting and I was directing, we made a short film about 24 minutes long about their program down there. And if you know anything about prison history, Angola is like one of our worst prisons.
Right.
Has 5,000 inmates. They go in and most of them don't ever come out. So they most of them have life sentences. And the warden there at the time, Burl Cain, over the years realized that, and maybe it was a accounting thing as well. He realized that the inmates there were dying badly. They were sent out and died badly by themselves, probably shackled to a hospital bed, which is one way that prisoners still die to date in this country, shackled to a hospital bed off-site. So Burl Cain, being the bean counter and also the very compassionate person he is, he said, there's got to be a better way here. We can train these prisoners to be hospice volunteers. We can bring community hospice in, have them train the prisoners, and they could be the caretakers for their buddies. So this was kind of an innovative program that he based on a program that was already up and running in California at the California Medical Facility. That was the first hospice set up for prisoners during the AIDS crisis. So long story short, this was 1999. I went down there and spent 3 weeks, made a short film, and we showed it at the conference as planned. And that short film, although it's not the type of film I would make on a personal level, it was kind of a blueprint on how to set up a hospice program. It was a film that kind of demystified the process, and it showed how simple it was. It really was a simple thing. It wasn't rocket science. And after the conference, we set out to distribute the film widely, and we sent out, at the time, that was video. VHS was the format, so we sent out hundreds of VHS cassettes to hundreds of prisons in this country. And it's a 24-minute film. Doesn't require a long session to watch. And we were hoping that prisons would say, you know what, we could do this. And a lot of prisons did do it. They saw it and they said, well, we can do this. This isn't going to cost money. It's going to save money. And it's going to actually change the community behind the walls, which it does usually when prisoners are involved. Yeah. So that's how I kind of got involved with it. I got to tell you, being down in Angola was an eye opener. I came back with PTSD because that program in that prison, no matter how good that program was. I mean, prisons they are soul sucking, and they're kind of horrible. And this prison at least had a program that was very progressive, incorporating the prisoner into the care of their fellow prisoners. And it was a beautiful, beautiful story.
It was. I've watched it a few times. And I guess being from Texas, Southeast Texas, I knew about Angola Prison. And that's one of the, it's like Alcatraz. People have heard of it, at least in this part of the country.
Yeah.
It's a pretty hard place. So interesting. It was almost just sort of an accident that you stumbled into that.
It was. I mean, I lucked out. I mean, it was like agony for 3 weeks. But I also, as a filmmaker, I was like, my God, I have access to this maximum security prison, and I access to these stories. But I was down there only for 3 weeks, and that was the thing that made me think about maybe pursuing this issue more, because I was only there for 3 weeks. I got to know the inmates really well, but I didn't get to know the patient very well. I kind of was. I focused on one guy. He had a brain tumor. And he was in there for a few days, and then he passed away and met his family and stuff. But I felt like I shortchanged the whole thing. For that film, it worked. But then I thought, you know what? I think I want to keep on going with this. So I just kind of put it in the back burner, saying like, I'll revisit this issue later, which I did like 10 years later when I moved back to Illinois and made Prison Terminal.
So let's talk about Prison Terminal, because you had a desire to connect with the patient. And in Prison Terminal, the last days of Private Jack Hall, you did connect with Jack quite a bit. So tell the listeners about Jack.
Well, Jack, I'll tell you a little bit about how I even got to the Iowa State Penitentiary, which will lead into Jack.
Okay.
When I moved back to Illinois, I started doing a little more research on what other prison hospices were in the area. And really, I have to tell you, out of the 1,800 prisons we have in the country, currently we only have 80 prison hospices. And of those 80, only 24 or so are like the model that you saw in Angola and the model that you saw in Prison Terminal. So there's really only, a handful of prison hospices that incorporate the prisoner as a caregiver. And that is the model that I learned in Angola, and I saw the benefits firsthand on how that works. And I was determined to make my next film about a prison that used the same model. And thank God, Iowa State Penitentiary used that same model, where the prisoner is trained as a hospice volunteer and then takes care of his ailing buddy. So I met Jack when I approached the Iowa State Penitentiary out of the blue, really. They were about 5 hours away from where I live now in Illinois. And I thought, well, okay, I can drive that, which is not every day, but let's see what they say. So my wish list was, I would love to make a film about your hospice program. I want a cell of my own for a year, and I work alone, so it's not like I'm dragging in a whole bunch of people. It's just me. And I proposed that to Marilyn Sales, who is the director of nursing in the film that you saw. And she said, well, that's kind of a high mark but let me get a meeting with you and the warden and see how it goes. So long story short, they did allow me to film in the prison 24/7 for up to a year. They did not allow me to have a cell of my own, which actually, in retrospect, I'm kind of glad, because I probably wouldn't have slept a wink. But they did give me access. And the weird thing about it is that they gave me carte blanche to go in their prison, because they were actually using my Angola film as a teaching tool to teach their prisoners. So connections are everything in prison. So the fact that they were using my film already, my earlier film, as a teaching tool, kind of put my foot in the door. And they said, well, since we're using your work right now, we would love to have you focus in on our program. So I was basically at the Iowa State Penitentiary for 6 months. And in those 6 months, I met Jack I met him from the get-go, right at the beginning, but he was not the hospice patient. He was just a long-term infirmary patient. And there was no hospice patient actually there for the first month or so, which gave me a great opportunity to get to know people, to gain their trust. I usually don't walk in with a camera on my shoulder. I wait for a month before I even do that. I want to get people to trust me. And in prison, trust is everything. So I needed the trust of the inmate, which I gained pretty quickly. Having seen my earlier work, I think they trusted me from the get-go. The people I needed to be to get trust, to build some trust and bond with were the medical people, the nurses and the doctors, as well as the correctional officers, because you have a independent filmmaker coming in with a camera on his shoulder. They're all a little bit paranoid and nervous.
Sure.
So that was, but Jack was an infirmary patient who I met at the beginning, and I had no idea he was going to be the next hospice patient. It just happened along the way.
Jack had actually been in the infirmary for 12 years after a heart attack.
Right. Yeah. After the heart attack, it was determined that Jack was, he couldn't really fend for himself in general population in a maximum security prison. So they put him in the infirmary, and he was a long-termer there. And they was like, out of the 12 beds in that infirmary, there were about 2 or 3 long-termers there. And Jack was one of them. So the nursing staff knew Jack inside and out. He's been there. He was there for over 20 years anyway. So they knew him as kind of a irascible curmudgeon, but kind of a fatherly, grandfatherly character that they all really did love him dearly, as much as he would allow. He was, he's kind of he's a little tough guy to get to know.
Yeah, you could see that in the film. And I think Jack was, in the film, he's very open about, this is who I am, this is where I've been. Jack was convicted of murder and had a life sentence. And I was really struck by his not acceptance, but awareness and acknowledgement of, this is what I've done. I'm being punished. I was condemned for this. This is where I am. And he even told the doctor in one of the segments, he said, I'll see you in hell.
He did. Yeah.
And of course, the doctor said, that's not where I'm going. I don't think that's where I'm going to be. But Jack had a certain acceptance. And you can see his spiritual side, how he's contemplating what lies for him, what he can expect after his death.
I think one thing that came out of me following Jack for his last 4 months of life in the infirmary was really, there is a backstory to Jack where he is actually fearful. I don't think he knew where he was going. And, you could tell, ever so slightly. I've seen the film thousands of times, so I can see that story just always being there. Jack's fear of like, well, I'm going to go to hell probably because of all the stuff I did.
Right.
So that's always in the background for Jack. I think he knew, and his family knew that, he was going to heaven. In fact, I have scenes where he's with other hospice volunteers, and another one's a Vietnam vet. He's like, Jack, we've all done bad things, but as Christians, we are forgiven for what we've done, and we can move on. And they were talking about basically what they did when they were in the war, in the military. Yeah, Jack's life, he was wondering all the time whether he was going to go to heaven or hell. I think that was his biggest fear all the time. He would never admit it, but it was.
Yeah, one of the scenes where you're talking with him at the very beginning of the film, he says, I'm going to leave here in a box. He knew that his life was going to end in that place, in that infirmary, isolated that way. So I'd like to touch on the relationship between Herky and Jack. So Herky was very, very different from Jack, except for the fact that they shared this common experience being in prison. So tell us more about Herky and his relationship with Jack.
Well, Herky, I think he went to prison in 1979. So this is like, to talk to those guys and realize that you've lived a full life since the 70s, and they've been behind the walls that long. That's another mind-blowing thing you have to take in as a civilian going in. And, Herky and Glover, who you saw in the film also, and Love, they were all hard asses. When they came into prison in the 70s, it was a different environment completely. Jack came later, but Jack was part of like this kind of a racist, he never wanted to deal with blacks. And he was part of this kind of a not necessarily a white supremacist group, but back, it's more of an older, like racism basically, and he would
Sure.
never deal with black guys at all. And really, when you see that this whole thing switches around at the end of his life, it's pretty much it's an amazing story as well. So Herky, like I said earlier, he's kind of a hard ass, and he worked with, he hung out with his group, his gang, his group. I shouldn't say gang because it's a different era, but with his group out in the yard and stuff, and they never really cross-pollinated with white prisoners, and that's how the prisoners pretty much existed for a very long time. And I'm not saying that the prison hospice program that came much later was the catalyst to change the entire environment in that prison, but it was one of the programs that did really make a change in that prison. And it usually does in most prisons, where really where race dissolves and you are dealing with a human being, whether they're white, black, yellow. You're dealing with them. They are your patient. They are and you suddenly realize the severity and the importance of what you're doing. You're helping someone pass away. And that's where like all the racism really does fall away when it comes down to those last weeks or whatever. And this is where this program, I think for many of the guys at the Iowa State Penitentiary who became hospice volunteers, it changed their life because for the first time they could be compassionate human beings. Marilyn Sales, the director of nursing, made certain that these guys could touch each other because there are hospice programs in prisons that don't allow touching. And those are the 80 other ones I was telling you about, the other 60, where hands-on stuff is not allowed. Well, in the Iowa State Penitentiary, Maryland made certain that these guys could touch each other. They could massage their feet. They could put lotion on their hands. They could change their diapers if they have to. And that really makes a huge difference, I think, when you're being a human being with another human being who happens to be passing away. So it's a great opportunity. But, Herky was in for murder. They're all the hospice guys, the volunteers are in for murder, except for Love, who was, he kidnapped. It was a violent situation, but no one died. And in Iowa, kidnapping is a life sentence. So he was also a lifer.
You could see that in the relationship between Jack and the other prisoners who were caring for him, that it transcended all of that other stuff, all of the past, all of the process and the imprisonment part of things. And I think they were sort of it seemed as if they were sort of in a bubble, and they were in the infirmary inside the hospice program where they could shed a lot of that identity that was so burdensome and just be there with Jack. I was struck by how Herky would talk to him and call him his brother.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, he called him brother frequently. And there was a lot of physical touch, rubbing Jack's back. Jack had a lot of respiratory issues. And Hervey would not just be there for him physically. He did the hand rubbing and the massage, but also talking with him and connecting with him about his anxiety and where we are and where you're going, and just this connection between two humans that was really amazing, very intense, very intense. So when you're watching this, you have to be disconnected to a certain point as you're filming. But when you're in post-production and you're looking at it again and you're seeing these conversations that you were witness to, obviously that has to affect you. How did it change you? How did that affect you to be witness to these things?
Well, I mean, as a filmmaker, I look back on that time and I pinch myself because I was granted that access to this entire prison. And I didn't only have to stick around in the infirmary. I could go anywhere in the prison I wanted. And, that raised a lot of brows saying like, how does this guy get around how can he be in the cell house at 9 p.m. with the, but that was just amazing for me to be there. And I witnessed a lot because I was in the prison every day for 12 to 15 hours for 6 months nonstop. And because I work alone, I could do that. I mean, if I had to pay a sound person and stuff like that to be there with me, not only would it stop me from bonding with everybody, I think it just add another layer of bureaucracy that I just wanted to be streamlined. So being there for 6 months and filming a lot, I filmed 300 hours of footage behind the walls, and stories like that you saw in the film. I could tell you there were probably 10 more that never made it to the screen. I shot so much, and it was like I was a kid in a candy store. And it wasn't like I just pushed the button and walked away. I mean, I was able to, in a weird way, I have to tell you, once I was in there for a while, I guess I was in my own bubble, my production bubble, because I would have this symbiosis with my camera and what was happening in front of it. And I could actually change positions and go over someone else's shoulder, realize what I just shot in a conversation, and kind of see where that could be picked up over the shoulder on another angle. I mean, it's kind of technical, but it's amazing how scenes I could just almost edit them while I was filming them, because I was like, okay, that'll cut with that. I'm over Jack's shoulder filming his son, talking to him, and all this stuff kind of came together. And I got to tell you, that was probably the first, and ever since then, the last time I was able to like just film seamlessly, and just, it felt really good. And it also felt, I mean, I work alone also because if I screw up, no one's there to say like, oh my God, you're an idiot. So it, there's a lot of mistakes too. But being in there with those guys for 6 months, it was great. I mean, I'm still friends. I mean, I just wrote Herky this morning. I mean, I'm still friends with Herky and Glove and Love and Jack's family. I just got a Christmas card from Jack's son, Don, yesterday. So I also find it, it's not even I just find it important to stay connected to the people that you film. I mean, you've changed their life. They've changed your life. You become friends and family. So I'm not even answering your question, am I?
No, I think you are, absolutely. And, it's funny because hearing you say this as a hospice nurse, this is exactly the story that every hospice professional that's been at a bedside with a family and a person who's dying has. And we've talked about this on the podcast before. There's some sort of thread. There's this community of story. My hospice story connects to yours. I go to the grocery store and I have on scrubs with the insignia and my name badge. It says I work for a certain hospice. And the cashier at the grocery store says, my grandfather died on hospice about a month ago, and then tells me the story.
Yeah.
And yet it's a transactional relationship, and then it becomes way more than that. It's a human connection of a shared experience. And what you've done is become a hospice, an end-of-life professional, an end-of-life worker through your filmmaking.
Well, I actually before I even made the film, I mean, this is after Angola, when I came back to Illinois and determined to make another film on hospice, and a longer one. I wanted to follow a prisoner patient for up to a year in the process of him passing away. I became a hospice volunteer. I went to my local hospice, community hospice, and I was trained. So at least I would know, like, what am I up against? What I need to focus on as a hospice volunteer, and I was very surprised that this was all new to me. So I was surprised that the prisoner hospice volunteers at the Iowa State Penitentiary, they took the same hospice training I did. They brought the community hospice in from Lee County, and two gals from the Lee County Hospice trained the prisoners. And I filmed a lot of educational, them doing their homework and the class and the classwork. So, it was great to see full circle. Like, I took the same classes they are really well trained. In fact, the hospice community hospice workers would say, like, this is the best class I've ever had. These guys are just so willing and wanting to learn, because they're being given an opportunity that they never thought they'd ever have behind the walls.
I was struck by the scenes where they had, I think it was family members of the staff at the prison come through and tour the hospice area of the infirmary. And it was those guys, the prisoners who were actually working as volunteers to care for their buddies, who were giving the tour, talking about the care that they provided and the facility. And you could tell there was no arrogance, no anger. It was this is what we're doing. It's good work. It's valuable. It's pennies on the dollar. We're caring for our buddies. This is what we do. And you could see that there was a quiet pride
Oh, yeah.
in the work that they were doing. It was amazing. You could see that it changed their lives.
It did change their lives. And I have to say, the family of correctional officers coming in on that tour, and maybe even some medical personnel, their families coming in on that tour, it also shows that at the end of the day, the correctional officers, okay, there could be some, there's always a couple rotten apples in the barrel.
Sure.
But for the most part, nobody wants to go to work and be miserable and hate somebody 24, while you're clocked in. Nobody looks forward to being a hard ass all day long and being bitter. And so, I mean, to have a program like this and to see like, hey, good stuff can actually happen. And hey, I could never think Harkey would do something like this. I would never, suddenly even the correctional officers is looking at these prisoners in a different light. And I'm not saying it changes the entire community behind that wall,
right?
But it really does show the correctional officer, the administration, even some of the medical staff that at the end of the day, these guys are human beings. They're stepping up. They're doing unbelievable work. And some of them are doing work that maybe should be done by some of the staff, but so they're very helpful. They're very helpful, and they're very prideful of what they were able to accomplish there.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Navigating end-of-life care can be confusing and overwhelming. Hospice Navigation Services can help you navigate hospice care for the best end-of-life experience possible. Hospice navigators are hospice professionals with at least 10 years of hospice experience, trained to provide accurate, unbiased information. Our team's compassion and respect for quality of life allows them to help you focus on getting the kind of care you want. When you need in-depth information about hospice, a Level 1 navigation session can provide information on what hospice care includes, roles of the team members, and how to choose a hospice agency. A Level 2 session is the best choice if you want to include multiple members of your family or caregiving village, and includes an explanation of hospice costs and coverage. If you have specific questions about a current hospice experience, a question and answer session with a hospice navigator can give you the answers you need. Watch for the launch of the Hospice Navigation Services in January 2023. Hospice Navigation Services, the guide for your journey.
There was something that has stayed with me since I watched the film that I want to talk with you about. Mm-hmm. It's part process and it's part ritual, as we would say in the hospice world, in end-of-life care. So when Jack died, they have a policy, I guess, where the prisoner is fingerprinted.
Yeah.
And in death, here's Jack. His fingers are inked, and the fingerprint card is created. And I believe it's Marilyn's voice. You can hear her saying that they are to make sure that every single bit of that ink is removed. And I was so struck by that. To me, it said they wanted Jack to leave that place where he'd been imprisoned for so long as a human being and not anything on his body that identified him as somebody who'd been incarcerated.
Well, that line, I'm glad you pulled that out of the film, because that, if there's a line that makes me cry, which I may in about a minute, is that one. And Marilyn, I have to say, Marilyn was instrumental in getting that program up and running. In a general way, I have to share with you that if it wasn't for Marilyn or a person like Marilyn, a lot of these prison hospices would not even exist. You need people behind the walls who are determined to get a prison hospice like this. That was not easy. And a lot of times when I screen the film, I tell like students, like nursing students and stuff, they see people sitting next to Jack's bed and they think, oh, well, that's hospice, family's there. Sure. Jack's friend is there. Oh, that's hospice. I go, you know what? No, it's hospice in a maximum security prison, which is a miracle. Jack's family could never be in most prisons. They would never be able to be in the infirmary next to him. Schaefer, his best friend from when his childhood, Schaefer would never be allowed to be next to Jack. He's a prisoner himself. So these are minor miracles that happen behind the walls. And I tell you that about Marilyn because she was the bulldog that they needed to put this program through. And she said, like, listen, you guys, this is not my program. I will help you start this prison hospice, but you have to take ownership of it. Because if you don't have the pride of this program, it will fail. And the guys know that. They know that really well because these programs are very fragile. Every program is fragile behind prison. But the minute you give someone an excuse to yank it and cancel it, they'll do it. And especially with a hospice like this, where you're actually hands-on, and there's so many ways that infractions could happen. But these guys were self-policing. And really, Marilyn was amazing. And that line that she says about, I don't want any fingerprint ink on their hand, that just kills me because it's so true. She's like, okay, he may have come in here after committing a crime, but he's going to go out here a human being. There should be no trace that he was a prisoner. And I love that. It's horrible. I mean, as a filmmaker, there are so many times in the film, and I'm sure you were going to ask me questions about some of these scenes where, like, the fingerprinting of Jack's body, the shackling of Jack when they take him off site. These are all moments of, they're very sad to see that they still need to shackle his ankles when they take him off site to a hospital. And these are all these personal indignities that happen in prison. And everyone has their role. The correctional officer has to put the shackles on. They don't even question it anymore. I'm sure they hate it, but they still do it because if something happens and Jack suddenly gets a second wind and kills 4 nurses, which probably would never happen, someone didn't do the shackling, so someone's in trouble. So there's all these roles that people play, and there are these indignities that occur despite the fact that Jack is terminally ill and unable to even stand up. But as a filmmaker, I realized that these are things I need to document to show people what happens behind the walls and why it happens, and why, I guess, you can see why it happens, but it's still kind of sad and, inhumane.
Did you ever watch some of that stuff, especially this shackling? So just to set the scene, Jack had a respiratory crisis, and at the last minute, he decided he did not want to be a do not resuscitate. He wanted treatment. So he decided, and the nurses decided that were on staff there, that he was going to be taken out to a local emergency room. He was placed on a gurney and he was shackled, hands and feet. Did you ever watch some of that stuff as a filmmaker, even though you were a little bit removed from it, right? Because you're an observer and not really part of that process. Did you ever find that repugnant and think, what in the hell am I doing in here? That I'm witnessing this and this is sick. Did you ever regret the decision to place yourself so deeply inside the situation?
No, I never regretted that at all. In fact, I mean, maybe I was self-justifying things. As a documentary filmmaker, things just roll off and you just have to film it. When they were shackling him, I was looking at Jack, with them putting the orange jumpsuit on him. I'm like, for God's sake, why do you have to color code him? He's like, basically, he's terminally ill. He's not going to run, but they have to put an orange jumpsuit on, which shows that they're taking him off site. And then I started hearing chains in the background, and I see them coming up with shackles, and I was like, oh my God. And then, at that point, I was like, I could say, like, oh, this is sick. I can't imagine this is even happening, but this is probably protocol, and I'm going to film it. And, the truth is, when I show the film, and when I even show it at correctional healthcare conferences and warden conferences, I usually stand in the back while the film is being shown. And when these scenes come onto the screen, I could see a lot of heads being like, oh, I can't believe we do that. There's a lot of shaking heads. And when it's a civilian screening, people just are like appalled that they're actually even putting shackles on him. And he's like, 83 years old, and he can't even move. So I never really felt bad for myself as witnessing it, because I felt like I'm taking this story and I'm going to hopefully take it out into the world and show and hopefully explain why these things happen.
Yeah. And for them to mark Jack with the orange jumpsuit, he couldn't even dress himself.
I know.
That was before he was shackled. He was so weak and so short of breath and so filled with anxiety that he could not even dress himself, and they had to put it on him. So, I'm struck by the fact that he was marked by shackles and an orange jumpsuit, and yet when he left for the final time, taken out in the body bag, they make sure that he was not marked at all.
Right.
That he was just himself,
Right.
just Jack Hall.
Well, see, so there's the contradiction where like all these other things have to happen just to keep the machine rolling smoothly. Put the shackles on, put his orange jumpsuit on, which denotes he's being taken off site. And you're right. At the end, he's basically naked in a body bag, and he's leaving as a human being without any markings.
Yeah.
A lot of tattoos.
Well, yeah. He had a particularly obscene tattoo, trigger warning for any woman who might watch the documentary. He had a very obscene tattoo right on the middle of his belly.
That was done in World War II, actually. So,
Yeah.
So, a lot of them.
Jack was a character in a lot of different ways. So I'm really struck, hospice philosophy, since you've been a hospice volunteer, you know that everything we do revolves around quality of life for the patient.
Yeah.
And you have to look at Jack's quality of life. So he'd been in the infirmary for 12 years, which isolated him from a lot of the prison population. He'd been separated from his friend. Was it Schaefer?
Schaefer, yeah.
Schaefer. And then in hospice, even isolating him even further because he couldn't get in and out of his own room, out of his own bed, for that matter, transferred to a chair without help. And yet, that hospice team, including the inmates, because they were doing a lot of the heavy lifting work, they were able to ensure that Jack had quality of life. His family was there, a son who actually had turned Jack in for the murder, and connection with his old buddy. And they were hilarious, those two guys together, these two old guys. Well, you ugly old bastard. And what are you doing here, you lowlife? They were hilarious when they reconnected out in the yard.
Yeah.
But just the quality of life from that, it was pretty amazing.
The thing is, and I think about this a lot, and Herky being in there since 79, I still can't imagine. And look, all these guys, you end up making home out of prison, and you make your family out of the guys who are with you. And that's why this hospice program works, because like it or not, Herky is your brother. You've been with him for 20 years. You've seen Herky grow up since he was a 25-year-old. So Jack has seen Herky as a young punk when he was in his early 20s. And everyone has seen Jack for years and years. And eventually you become, you make it. And we would all do that. I think just to survive, you would make prison a home eventually. It's horrible. I have friends in prison, a friend of mine who's in prison. She's been in for 23 years. Yeah, she has kind of family in there, people that she can trust, she can console and confide in. It's not a healthy place, let's say that. But people, as human beings, we do bond with other people, and we end up making family out of the people we're with mostly. So Jack's friendship with Schaefer, and the other guys who take care of him, that is kind of a beautiful kind of unfolding of what eventually happens in prison. And the friendships, and then if hospice is a program in that particular prison, it's just another way of adding another beautiful layer of connectedness that these prisoners have with each other.
Yeah, creating grace inside that horrible situation, horrible place, right? Nobody would choose to be there if they could help it. The work that you're doing, you actually work with an organization called the Humane Prison Hospice Project. Tell us about the organization and the work that you and the team there are doing.
I was fortunate after I finished the film, Prison Terminal. It was on HBO for a couple of years, and it also got nominated for an Oscar, which I did not see coming. But anyway, we'll get into that later if you want. But anyway, we don't have to. But when I finished the film, I was taught by my mentor at film school in Carbondale, Illinois, Mike Covell, my film professor. He said, listen, if you're going to do documentaries that are going to change the world or do something, you got to put them out there. You just can't finish it and put it on a shelf. What good is it going to do if just collecting dust on a shelf? So he instilled in me at a very early age that if I'm going to make a film, first of all, I'm going to make it and finish it, because so many films go unfinished. Not in school because you need to get a grade and stuff like that, but later in life, a lot of projects just kind of sit and flounder on a shelf. He says, like, if you're going to do something, plus you have people that you've already committed to, you're committed with helping these people, you got to go out in the world and show the film. So after I got all this attention with Prison Terminal and being on HBO and stuff, I was able to get funding to take the film out. Out and about, I was able to buy a projector and a big speaker and a nice bag. And I put myself out there, and it was only $20,000 to do like 100 prisons in 100 days tour of Prison Terminal, which was I did not do 100 prisons in 100 days. It was mostly 100 prisons in like 300 days. It took a long, long time. Yeah. But I was able to get the film out there and show it to prisons and, hopefully start changing minds out there. And, you have to be invited to a prison. You just can't just show up and scratch on the door. So there was a long process of getting into these prisons. But it was very fruitful, and I was able to show a lot of prisoners and administration folks behind the walls what a good program this is and how easy it is to incorporate. Now I'm thinking I am not answering your question. What was it? Genius, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Humane Prison Hospice Project.
Oh my God.
Because that's an offshoot of the documentary and the work that you started doing.
Absolutely. So this is why I'm telling you about the tour. I showed the film in so many places, and one of my screenings happened to be out in San Francisco. A gal named Sandy Fish contacted me and said, "Listen, I heard about your film. I work for the hospice out in San Francisco, community hospice, and I want to show your film. I would love for you to come out here, talk to the people, the hospice volunteers, show your film, and because I don't think these hospice volunteers ever think about prisoners dying." And that's true. I mean, that's one reason I do other screenings, not only at prisons, but community hospices and colleges and stuff. So I went out there just like a routine screening that I would normally. And Sandy said, "Listen, I'm kind of starting my own little group we're trying to get prison hospices put into California prisons. We have 33 prisons and only 17 hospice beds for 200,000 people." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh." She goes, "Well, I work with another friend of mine, Lady Bird Morgan, and we're basically, we're trying to get prison hospices put into the state of California. Would you like to help us?" I go, "Well, I'll help however I can. I'll do screenings, whatever." So for the first few years, it was just a ragtag bunch of us, and it still is actually, but it was only 3 or 4 people. And we did screenings up and down the coast in hopes that we would jumpstart prison hospices. And eventually, I mean, some prisons said that, I mean, it's very hard to convince a prison, especially California. I mean, there's a lot of issues out in California. I mean, as there are in Texas and Illinois and every place. But
sure.
But the Humane Prison Hospice was just a ragtag group of folks that we started doing screenings and presentations, and just to try to turn the needle a little bit on getting prison hospices in that state. And I've worked with them now since, for probably the last 7 years. And it was a perfect fit, I have to say, because the model that they are promoting is exactly what is in my film, Prison Terminal, and exactly what was in Angola, too. It's a prisoner-involved hospice team who are trained by community hospice, and they work alongside the nurses and the doctors, and they don't do any medication at all. They're there for support, emotional support, and really compassionate care. So they were on board. I was on board immediately because that was the program that I filmed and I support. And then it was a kind of a perfect melding of forces. And I've been with them and I'm still with them. Luckily, just by happenstance, one of our members, Marvin Much, was at a conference and he talked to somebody, and one thing led to another. We got an anonymous donation so we could hire a couple more people in executive positions for Humane, and that has made a huge difference. Now we're cooking with gas now. We have a little bit of money, and now we're able to really do a lot of stuff. So hopefully we'll do the California thing. It's a long haul, but hopefully within the next 5 years. It's taken a long time. I got to tell you, one of your questions was, has there been any changes since I made these films? And I have to say yes and no, because sometimes a hospice program will start up and this is the fragility of what I want of these programs. Sometimes these programs will start up and they'll go like gangbusters, and then someone will, like the warden will retire or transfer, or like a woman like Marilyn Sales will retire, and which she did when I was filming Prison Terminal, she did retire. And what happens with these programs, if someone who is key, who is one of the originators or the founders, if they leave, a lot of times these programs do kind of fall apart because and I hate saying that. The truth is, when I was filming it in the Iowa State Penitentiary, Marilyn was getting ready to retire. And I really didn't even know that until, God, I don't know, about a month before I left. And Herky and Glove were already putting in for transfers to go to other prisons. And I'm like, wait a second, you guys have a beautiful hospice program here. Why are you putting in for transfer just because Marilyn's leaving? They said, you don't get it. I mean, when she leaves, this place is going to be a shit show. Mm-hmm. I'm like, really? He goes, yeah, it won't be anything you see right now. It'll be so different. And the truth is, it did become a shadow of its former self. So the prison hospice that you see in my film was at its peak. And then when Marilyn left, she handed the baton to someone who was capable and totally, supportive of the program. But that person was not Marilyn. And Marilyn had this way of getting things done. Pushing buttons, pulling strings, whatever she had to do to get it done. So if you have someone in there who's not like that, sometimes these programs just kind of fall apart.
Yeah. I think Marilyn was a combination of what we call a mama bear nurse, which means a little bit bulldog, a little bit mama bear, skilled clinician, protector, sheepdog. You have to have somebody like that. Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Every hospice program needs something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have given our listeners a wonderful opportunity to watch Prison Terminal for free. Tell the listeners how they can watch the video, and of course I'm going to have links to everything, but tell the listeners how they can watch Prison Terminal.
Yeah, I mean, if you give them the link, they can actually watch. It's 39 minutes long. It's kind of, I have to say, looking as a filmmaker who shot 300 hours and knowing full well how much more I could put up on the screen, I love it. I have to say, just on a personal note, it was very difficult to ever get funding to finish this film. So I shot the film, and I hate to admit this, but I shot the film in 2006, finished it in 2013. It took me 6-7 years to get the attention of, I wrote proposals, grant proposals. I had people come in and help me write grant proposals because I thought, well, I'm not getting any money. I must be a horrible writer.
Right.
So we never got money even with the professional proposals I had paid for. It's the truth is because death is such a topic that people don't want to hear about, and then the death of a prisoner is even lower on that list.
Right.
So long story short, and I know I'm going on, but HBO saw some of my footage and came on board and helped me finish the film. And they set me up with a fantastic editor who was able to look at all my footage and boil it down to this 39-minute short film that just pretty much hits all the bases I wanted to hit. When I was editing the film on my own between that 2006 and 2013, I had like a 6-hour miniseries on a prison hospice that probably no one would ever watch. So the fact that it's 40 minutes long, 39 minutes long is a blessing, actually. And it works well in the classroom session and pretty much everywhere I go. Yeah.
Right. And it is available for screenings for educational purposes, obviously with a fee.
Yeah. Well, also, yeah, I mean, that's true. But if you, if someone who's listening here wants to have a screening and a presentation of the film and with my colleagues from Humane Prison Hospice, whether it's virtual or actually in person, please, get a hold of me. You can write me at prisonterminal@yahoo.com. usually on a virtual presentation, we'd like to at least have 50 people. So because it's a 90-minute presentation with the
Sure.
film and us talking, it's 90 minutes. So if any listeners can, they think they can muster up 50 people or more, or if they want to invite us to a conference that they know of that we don't know of, where this film might play really well, please don't hesitate to get a hold of me. Yeah.
Well, we'll have links to everything in the show notes, and I'll make sure that we include it in the introduction and outro so that our listeners can find you and your work and the film. Edgar, you have amazed us with this film that you've made. I will go out and say you honored Jack's life.
Well, thank you.
And his humanity with what you did. Not just the prison hospice program, but an honoring of Jack's humanity and who he was. And I think that's an incredible achievement just by itself.
Well, thank you. Eventually that's what I wanted to do as well. I mean, to show that, Jack is a human being with flaws, but he is a human being and his story should be heard. I know you might want to cut this out, but I just to share with you, when Jack passed away, he was a World War II vet. He was a decorated war hero. And over the years, his family, and Don told him, Dad, I'm getting you a plot in the military cemetery here in Keokuk. So you're going to have a plot there in the war memorial. I'm paying monthly to get that plot for you. So long story short, after Jack passed away and we were at his funeral, we were putting the coffin into the hearse, and Don, his son, got a call from the cemetery saying, like, we don't want his body. We don't have to take his body. In fact, we're rejecting him because we can. Because of the Timothy McVeigh bombing of the federal building, a law was changed making that if you have a felony or capital crime, you are not eligible to be buried in a military cemetery.
Oh, wow.
So at the very last second, they yanked something that Jack was that was one thing he was living for, was to be buried with the other veterans. So it was such a blow to his family. Obviously, Jack was not alive to hear but no one ever knew that there was a change in law that way. So I think it's kind of a bitter. It's not bittersweet. It's bitter, actually, the way that he was treated at the very end of his life.
You've got a grieving family, and then to be told we're going to dishonor your father even further,
right?
Up in the plans and the promises that you made to him to have in place there.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, this is also a system that basically Jack came back with PTSD. I mean, he killed hundreds of enemy soldiers. He was trained as a ranger. So he literally killed many, many soldiers, Italian and German soldiers, when he was there as a 17, 18, 19-year-old. His life went down the tubes mostly because he was self-medicating himself with alcohol after being in Europe for 3 years and seeing the atrocities and committing atrocities, but for his country.
Sure. And
that to have the United States turn around and say you're no longer worthy of being buried with the rest of the veterans it's just horrible. I don't know. That's another film I'd like to do, because I think there's a lot of veterans in behind the walls that are not aware that they are not going to get there.
Yeah, it devalued Jack's service. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Edgar, thank you. Thank you for sharing all the stories, the tangents. All of it was wonderful. Our listeners are going to be just soaking this up. Thank you so much for talking with me. It's been great.
Thank you very much. It's been great also.
Wow. This could have been a much longer conversation. I think I probably did talk to him for another 30 minutes afterwards. There's so much backstory behind the making of the documentary and Edgar's experience as a hospice volunteer and what he's working on now. He's just an amazing guy doing some incredible work. I was really struck by the parallels between end-of-life professionals and how they get into this work and they're captured by it, with his story of how he stumbled into the story about hospice at Angola Prison back in 1989 and how he's working to inspire and motivate and encourage other prisons to establish their own hospice programs that are very similar. It's a lot like how a hospice or end-of-life worker gets captivated is really the only word I can think of that suits it, but how we get drawn in accidentally. We stumble into it, fall into it, come across it without any intention, and then realize the incredible depth and value of working in end-of-life care. And, Jack, he was a mess. Funny, irreverent, a little foul-mouthed, a little rough on the side, but also a very reflective man. And I think the film Prison Terminal did so much to capture his humanity. And it was a true tribute to the human that was Jack. It's funny that Jack wasn't chosen as the subject of the film, but he was the first hospice patient when Edgar happened to start his project to do his documentary. And how intense that must have been for Edgar doing the filming all by himself, no assistance. To carry that by himself, we should have maybe talked about what he did for self-care and what kind of debriefing he was able to do after witnessing Jack's death and all the processing that takes place after a prisoner's death. Maybe his contact with the people in the film, Herky, Love, Glove, and Jack's son, Don, maybe that's one of the ways Edgar memorializes and shows respect for that memory and that experience for himself, along with volunteering at a local hospice. He received the same volunteer training as the prison hospice volunteers, which is pretty amazing. It takes a great commitment to work as a hospice volunteer. Of course, as a nurse, I have to say, I love it that mama bear, sheepdog, pit bull, Marilyn, who is a nurse, was such a person of influence on creating that hospice program and keeping it going. And obviously, the fact that it's changed a lot, the program has since Marilyn's retirement, is indicative of how much influence she had on the program to begin with. And the persistence that Edgar had in working on the film, filming in 2006, I think he said, but then not finishing it, closing it to completion until 2013. Thank goodness for his dedication and his tenacity to finish the project. So remember that Edgar is being generous with our listeners. You can go in, click on the link, and you can watch for free for a week following the broadcast of this podcast. You'll be using a code HEART, H-E-A-R-T. Again, all of that will be in the show notes. I would really encourage you, especially if you work in end-of-life care, to go in and watch the documentary, especially if you are experiencing any type of burnout. If you find that you are feeling apathetic and you are lacking compassion or lacking empathy in your work with seriously ill and dying patients, go in and watch this. I don't know if we had a room of 1 million people that there would be a dry eye at a screening of this documentary. It touches your heart, your humanity, and links you to some incredible work and that Edgar Barens is highlighting. So I would really encourage you to watch it, and you're going to have the chance to watch it for free for a week following the drop of this podcast. So I would encourage you to check out Prison Terminal. Be sure to catch the next episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast. You can find more episodes on theheartofhospice.com, and don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. You can connect with the Heart of Hospice on Facebook and Instagram, and send your questions or comments to me by email at helen@theheartofhospice.com. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.